Hi, this is Jim Rivas, CEO of Cloud Security Alliance, and welcome to the CSA AI Summit Q1 2025. Very excited with all the content we've had here. And this is a session I'm just delighted to be a part of, to get to listen to some great experts. This is compliance automation revolution, big provocative title, so we'll see if it fulfills that. So what we are doing here is we're actually providing somewhat of a soft launch insight into a new initiative at CSA and provide somewhat of a call to action. And then you're going to see a full formal launch of this in the next few months. But we're delighted to have some people who've already put their hands up and say this is like very important to them, and they are going to be part of that founding crew. So I'm gonna first let them introduce themselves. Adam, would you like to go first?
Sure. Thanks, Jim. My name's Adam Schneider. I'm the Executive Vice President of Assessment Services at Coalfire. I've been with Coalfire and in the compliance space for 15 years, and a few years before that around PCI and a few other compliance regulations. Prior to that, spent most of my career, the last 23 years, in cybersecurity, all the way back to implementing application security for ERP solutions, and moved into compliance about 16 years ago or so. Very excited to be here, talk about where we are today from a compliance perspective and automation and what we need to do moving forward to make it sustainable.
Let's go over to Daniele next.
Hi, Jim. So this is Daniele Cattedu. I'm the Chief Technology Officer at the Cloud Security Alliance and the co-founder of the STAR program. I've been in the security space for over 20 years and the last 13 spent at CSA, the greatest of the organizations. And alongside my colleagues, have been investigating in the space of assurance, compliance, and risk management for the last 10 years at least. So very excited to be part of this initiative.
Thank you, Daniele. And finally, let's go to Matthew Holt, and then I'm going to stay with you, Matthew, for the first question.
Great. Thanks, Jim. Hello, everybody. My name is Matthew Holt. I'm a partner with Deloitte. I happen to be based in Italy, but as you can tell by my name, I'm not Italian. I'm from the US. I've been working for about 36 years in cyber, since before it was called cyber. I started in the United States Defense Department, and about halfway through my career, I switched to consulting. And I've spent the last 10 years of that with Deloitte. And hopefully everybody knows that name and understands by default why compliance in itself is such an important issue for us, why moving towards an automated direction in compliance is important for us, and why cloud and AI are important for us. So that triumvirate of alignment is exactly what we're interested in.
All right. Thanks very much, Matthew. You've been around like me from when we could fit all the cybersecurity people in one room, I think.
Yeah.
It's changed quite a bit. And what I wanted to start with for you, Matthew, and then get Adam's take on this is just to understand in your viewpoint, like traditional compliance. And we need laws, we need rules. Of course, we understand all of that, but um, it seems like in some ways it's become unsustainable. Do you agree with that for like some organizations? And if so, like why would you say that is?
Yeah, I think unsustainable is a bit judgmental as a word, because I think whether or not something is unsustainable depends on how important it is for the organization that's trying to achieve a compliance. So, and what's the driver for that? So that could be a regulatory requirement, where if we look at like NERC or GDPR, you have to be compliant. Therefore, you make it work. Then there's other things like PCI DSS or SOC 2, which you might need as a business need to be able to do something that you want to do. And then there's just straight, we're trying to improve our maturity. We pick something that we want to be aligned to and shoot for compliance there. So whether or not the effort to get there is unsustainable, I think depends on which of those is the driver. That said, we do find in our larger clients, and I always try to share my client's point of view rather than my own. If you start looking at large global organizations, which many of our clients are, it is quite a challenge for them to just understand what they need to be compliant with in the first place, work out a governance mechanism to understand if they're compliant or not, implementing remediation plans and things like this on a global scale. I think unsustainable is probably a fair word to describe that effort. Yeah, absolutely.
That's makes me actually think back to, I think it was a survey, Adam, that Coal-Fire did maybe a year or so ago that I think it stated maybe 60% or so of organizations surveyed. It was very much, compliance was very much a manual a task, and that certainly could like create a lot of these issues. But what is your take on what you heard Matthew say in that, and the basic premise of that question?
Yeah, first of all, I agree with what Matthew said about, the mandatory nature of some of these things, the business opportunity that it creates, and the burden and the sustainability has to do with the benefits you're getting out of it. However, I would say that there are some components of how companies go about compliance and understanding what they need to do that is unsustainable. Judgmental or not, I believe that most organizations, I think the survey you're referring to said that most organizations that we surveyed have to comply with 6 or more regulations. That is growing every day because they want to enter markets in other countries. In Europe, every country seems to have its own regulation. In Asia, in Australia, there's new regulations everywhere. And it is becoming harder and harder for companies to make the business decision of which countries they're going to go into, which markets they're going to try to open up, which sectors they're going to go into because of compliance. And if they don't lean into new ways to do things and move away from the traditional preparation, spreadsheets, manual efforts that you pointed out that we also saw most of our customers surveyed were using, then they're going to find it harder and harder to take advantage of those business opportunities, and they're going to have to make much tougher decisions about what not to do because they're just not built in a way for them to grow um, and manage the level of compliance growth and frameworks that we're seeing pop up all around the world right now.
So the bigger you are, the harder this is. And probably as we think about how technology is enabling a lot of maybe smaller organizations to actually service a worldwide customer base, then potentially they will inherit a lot more of these pain points that we think of maybe as more of those larger globalized organizations. Daniele, so can you give us just sort of a high level, like, here's the major pillars of what we are seeking to do with this compliance automation revolution initiative and its major pillars?
With pleasure. So, Matt and Adam referred to, and you as well, Jim, from the one side, the need of sustainability or the existing unsustainability, and from the other side, the concept of necessity. So, compliance as a necessary evil, if you like, that has to be factored within the context of our organization. These two terms to me speak to the kind of more classical terms of efficiency and effectiveness. And to put it in very simple terms, our compliance automation revolution is really there to improve effectiveness and efficiency within compliance and to try to kind of move from a concept of compliance as a burden towards a situation of compliance as a business enabler and a competitive edge. That means alignment between compliance, operational security, and risk objectives, of course. The idea there is to make sure that assurance, compliance, and risk management can be engineered and coded within our organization, and starting directly from the CI/CD pipelines. So, in other words, I would say that the objective of the initiative is really to look at security, operational security, and compliance as to the two sides of the same coin. So, from one side, we got all the action that we need to define, embed, and enforce controls within our product and solution. And from the other end, all the other action that we need to provide suitable evidence to demonstrate the impact and the performance of that control. So if we look at this situation, the main pillars of the initiative are certainly going to be regulatory harmonization, compliance and security automation, continuous assurance, and then measurable risk management. Those are, let's say, the essence of what we are trying to build, and I guess we're going to have some time during this discussion to explore the four pillars in each one of the other four pillars.
Yeah, it sounds terrific to me. The vision behind this, Daniele, great job in thinking this through. And I know there's been a lot of people working with you on this, but I wanted to go to that pillar of regulatory harmonization and see if we can like get on that same page and understand what that is. And Adam, I wanted to get your perspective. Are we talking about it's this commonality of regulations that are out there, that there's a lot of intersection there? And is this like a key thing that organizations that have like very much of a complex environment for regulatory compliance, that they can sort of seek to achieve?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I do believe, first of all, regulatory harmonization is really an early step, a first step, and really nobody in the community has done this at the level of what CSA is working on right now that I've personally been involved in and seen the conversations around those intersections, Jim, that you just pointed out. This is where there's overlap. Most of these cyber compliance frameworks have a lot of commonality. Now, what they require as far as evidence assessment, that may differ, but there's no open source, if you will, good source that helps you get there. There are definitely unified frameworks out there, but really a lot of those are at too high of a level. I think what we're building and what's being built with CSA, I know Coal Fire's built our own perspective on the mappings across various frameworks at the evidence and the artifact level that's going to get them to assessment outcomes and compliance outcomes that they're looking for. But what's happening at CSA is the community is coming together to help build something that harmonizes these frameworks into something that other companies can use, can start from some place. And I think, Jim, you might have mentioned that this is difficult for global organizations. And I'd say that it's difficult for all organizations, especially those. And in fact, sometimes in that mid-market to, I'll call it smaller enterprise global companies, it tends to even be harder because they don't tend to have the same resources that some of these multinational global organizations have to open up new markets, but yet it's a business driver to move into a European market or an Asian market that they might not be in today. So those organizations need a head start with something like what CSA has put together, or a proprietary framework that another organization can help them adopt, along with a place to manage that, because it's not always sustainable to take spreadsheets and make this work. It has to live in a platform, live somewhere where they can actually manage the program, and then further their automation, including the addition of artificial intelligence into making that harmonization work for them a little bit more.
Yeah, Matthew, I'd love to get your take on what Adam said. It seemed to really align with my thinking on this, but I would imagine Deloitte's probably got a subject matter expert on almost every regulation that is in existence. Might be a little bit of an overstatement, but probably not too much. So, what is your take? Do you have any different perspective on regulatory harmonization and the benefits?
I wouldn't say a different perspective. First, I would confirm with a bit of modesty in my cup that it's not that the people that work for Deloitte are particularly genius and everybody else is not. We just have people everywhere in every country. So we do have subject matter experts on every local applicable regulation. But where it gets tricky, as we've said, and I agree 100% with what Adam said. In fact, earlier he mentioned that 6 or 7 might be the average. For the clients that we're serving in this space, that would be Shangri-La to have just 6 or 7. Usually it's going to be 60 or 70, somewhere in that range. And I also want to reemphasize the point you made about who has the resources to be able to manage that complexity, because the large multinational clients that we tend to serve do have the resources to engage some third-party provider to help them navigate that and figure that out and In my experience, it's a pretty bespoke solution every time because you have different geographies where you're doing different things. Now with cloud and AI growing, you're moving different data around in different places, and it gets extremely complex in an exponential form. So a large multinational oil and gas company, for example, has the resources to be able to engage perhaps a third party to help them do that. Whereas a smaller, small to medium organization doesn't really have that. There's no reason other than that they couldn't expand. So it does become quite a bit of a limiter for them. So I agree absolutely with this.
Thanks, Matthew. I kind of wonder, as we think through this from like our perspectives here, helping organizations with compliance and with the technology behind this, do we have the right sort of relationships with the regulatory bodies as well to understand this? I sometimes get the idea, the perspective that like we need to be educating regulators and we need to be telling them, oh, use these best practice standards, don't create these different rules. But I think over time I've come to think maybe like we don't understand their challenges as much as we think we do, or some of us don't. And maybe that's not an approach there, but I the point of this is I don't want us to think about this as, hey, it's a black box where laws and regulatory compliance comes from. So just any perspective that anybody wants to share on that?
Well, I can go first if you like. I guess that as we have been discussing for a very long time, each country, each regulator has the right and need to express any requirements that they feel appropriate for their environment, country, business sector in the way they prefer. And I think you're right, Jim, in the sense that when we talk about harmonization, perhaps we are looking at two different levels of harmonization. From the one side, I think we have the lower level harmonization, the easy to address, the one that to borrow Matthew words, they represent an issue for smaller and medium organization, but not necessarily for the big ones. For the big ones, it's just a compliance toll. It's just a burden. For the smaller organization, it is indeed kind of barrier to entry in the market sometimes. But let's define that as the easy part of the harmonization, where we can find a way to express in the same way requirements that are phrased, that are enunciated in a slightly different way. When it becomes possibly more complex, borrowing the word of Phil Venable that was in our discussion recently about the unintended consequences of this law. And now we can make sure that there is a dialogue between the market players and the policymakers and the regulators in order to be able to have that level of communication that make possible for us to really understand what the regulators are going after. And we are the ones, the experts, that are there to suggest how that can be translated into technical controls, into something that can be expressed by and accepted by our community. Now, that part is possibly the hardest to address. Nevertheless, I don't think, as we are going to be shy, and we are going to address and discuss with the regulators these very matters, because ultimately we can discuss about automation, we can discuss about continuous assurance, but in absence of a clear rule of engagement and understanding between us and the regulators, I'm afraid we are not going to move dramatically too much.
Yeah. So either Adam or Matthew, any other perspectives on where the regulatory bodies leave off and where we need to start and that we need to be considering?
Yeah, if I may chime in here, I don't think there's a demarcation point between the market and the regulator. In my experience, regulators, I've dealt mostly in the US and in Europe and in the Middle East. All of the regulators I've dealt with have always been very open to understanding how they can establish a standard that is feasible applicable that will work in the market, because they're not trying to disrupt the market. They're trying to steer the market in a certain direction. And in my experience, they understand if what comes out from them is not applicable and not implementable in the market, then it's not going to work. So what I generally see working there is not individual organizations approaching a regulator, because obviously they can't just have thousands of individual voices all saying what they want. So where it does tend to work, and I'm sure we've all seen public-private partnerships or the Charter of Trust, across most of Europe, and even the Middle East regulators, which tend to be very tightly integrated into their industries. All of them are pretty open to listening to forums of experts, helping them understand what's feasible and what's not. So I definitely think that's the right approach.
Yeah, if I may add on to that, I think Matthew's right. I think what I've seen in the market is, first of all of these regulations, all of these countries that are spinning things up, all these sectors that are spinning up new frameworks, it's all with good intent, right? They want to protect data, right? They want to protect information. So the problem is it's in its infancy. All of these countries are trying to figure out what they need to do to protect their citizens' data or their mission critical data. And so they're all just getting started. And I kind of equate I don't know if you guys have kids or if people listening have kids, but I equate it to when my kids go to school and they come back and every teacher, they're not talking to each other, but they're all giving an hour of homework a night. If they have 7 classes, that's 7 hours of homework, right? That's what it feels like in the compliance space right now. Every country is giving companies homework, but they're not thinking about what the other countries are asking for. But as Matthew said, they're all open to listening. In fact, many of them are creating organizations and governing bodies to inform them of how to steer the ship going forward. I've seen it with PCI as a sector one. I've seen it with FedRAMP as a government-based one, and we've seen it. I mean, ISO has feedback processes. Everybody is building up these feedback loops to make sure that they're trying to listen and engage the community so that they can improve the program so that we can start to talk to each other and we can all give one set of homework with one set of outcomes. But I do think, and this is where I'll bring it back to CSA, I do think what's happening with this open compliance initiative that CSA has started that we're all a part of is talking about how do we engage the regulators as a community, because it's easier for us to have a voice together than them hearing. I think Matthew said this, 1,000 voices coming at them at once. It just provides a lot more power to the voice when we're coming to them as a community.
Totally agree with that. And I think that like you guys have done a really good job of sort of giving people sort of the understanding of that current zeitgeist with the regulatory environment, the opportunities with making it better, the I think I heard a little bit of mention of AI by a couple of you, and I think that's probably where we should go next to talk about this. I mean, to Adam's point, I don't know if the when the teachers are each giving an hour's worth of homework, if the kids are using Chat GPT for at least solving half of that. But we when we think about we know we're on the precipice of so much change, and even now when you think about things like translation and how seamless that is for languages, now it's just incredible. And I would think that translation in a sort of a level of abstraction is a lot of what we're thinking about now. And I didn't position any of you to be the AI experts, but certainly you are thinking about this a lot, immersed in this. And I wanted to get some perspectives, and maybe Daniela, you can start. But I'd love to hear from everyone. Like, what do you think about where we are at with AI, where we see it going, and how important and what is the impact going to be of AI on this initiative and on compliance automation in general?
So, well, to be perfectly honest, I don't know where we are going. I think I am, as many, in a kind of state of confusion, amazed for with everything I'm seeing around that AI is bringing to us. Certainly, we are in a situation where, from the one side, we feel the urge to establish a mechanism to measure trustworthiness of Gen AI services. In fact, during this event, I did also a presentation on this very topic. And from the other side, though, especially we are looking into how AI is going to support that process of efficiency and effectiveness that I was mentioning earlier on. There are plenties of ways where Gen AI is going to come and help us in this process. You mentioned translation, Jim, and when we talk about translation, there is this loose connection with the concept of mapping between controls. That is certainly an area, alongside the regulatory analysis that we mentioned at the beginning of this conversation. That is an area where certainly AI is going to help us greatly. But if we think about the concept of continuous control monitoring, again, we are going to have the possibility to have compliance data that can be collected on a continuous basis. And the beauty of it is that we are going to have Gen AI tools that are going to support us not only in the collection of the evidence, but also in the further analysis to create early warning sign, disalignment from our compliance status, and so on and so forth. All of it in a much more effective and efficient way. Now, I'm not sure how much of a human in the loop we are going to require. I'm, partitorian of the idea, even though I don't have any evidence to back that up, that there's going to be a necessary level of human in the loop in this process of continuous or compliance automation and continuous assurance. Nevertheless, if we compare it to the current situation, we are going to be in a very good spot very soon, in my opinion.
Yeah, I think it's definitely have a big impact. It's clearly understanding how and when, and is the I think the question. Adam, what's your take on this?
Yeah, so I believe, the world is our oyster as it comes to AI, Gen AI, machine learning. I think right now where we are is there's a lot of great technology out there. I think we're many steps away from it really being a game changer because we haven't defined all the use cases, right? So AI is all about the data and the use cases. How are we going to teach the model, right? We have these big LLMs that we have to teach with all of this compliance information. I think, in fact, I'll go back to the open compliance initiative and the regulatory harmonization that's happening. I think feeding it a framework and a model that it can learn from quickly rather than it having to figure it out by itself is a great leap forward for how we can use AI differently within this space. So I know even at Coalfire, we're starting to build use cases of how we use AI to take something simple like policies and procedures and have it read the policies. And this is all done in a secure, private environment, and associate it with the right controls and the right requirements within the frameworks to help accelerate that process and even identify where there might be gaps without a human involved. And then the human gets involved to close the gaps, make sure those connections are right. We're still in I'll say the training phase in all of these use cases because you still want to Daniele's point, I don't know how much human involvement will be needed in 2, 3, 4 years. But today we want to train it. It's like teaching your kids again. Going back, obviously, I have kids because I relate a lot of my experiences to raising them. Right? We're talking about children. You have to teach them. You have to make sure they learned it properly, and then you have to correct misunderstandings too that might come up because you taught it one thing and you thought you were doing it with the right intent and the right way, but then you have to adjust it because they might have understood something that you didn't intend, and then you have to go get that corrected. So I think, again, it comes back to use cases and how we're going to use this technology. I believe a lot of the technology is there, as I said. It's just a matter of how do we train it and how do we use it, and getting those things aligned to be the most effective and drive that efficiency that we're looking for.
Yeah, I think to some of the projects that I've observed, been on the inside of that are using AI to do something transformational, and I liken it to you're trying to build a house, and the specifications for the hammer changes like 5 times, and the electrical specs change 3 times. It's such a challenge because you're seeing new models, and we're seeing agentic AI, we're seeing all sorts of things. You know, the deep reasoning that they're releasing now, some are saying that's going to really get rid of a lot of the jailbreaking hallucinations, things like that. But we always know that there's spy versus spy a lot of times when you're using technology here. But Matthew, what are the perspectives that you're having from where you're sitting?
I think what we've said here so far is spot on. Generally speaking, uh, uh, I hear three categories of AI conversations. One, as relates to cyber. One is how do we protect the AI platforms that we're developing internally for our business? How do we make sure they are built in a secure way? The second is how do we use AI as a security tool? And perhaps that's where the compliance use case starts to fall in place. And then the third is how do we protect ourselves against AI as an attack tool from whoever might be trying to attack us. So I think all of the use cases more or less fall into those three categories. But I think, and I think most people are aligned to that. Where I think there's probably the wider difference in opinion on the subject is, as Daniele initiated, how close are we to people not being involved in that process anymore? And that can range from this is all just a bunch of nonsense to consulting will be dead in 6 months. And the reality is probably somewhere in between there. And but I don't think we're as far along as some people would like to think that we are. And if you just look at consumer level AI, chat GPT or generating images and the 5 or 10 second clips in video or whatever, they're still coming out with like 7 fingers sometimes, and these weird things are happening. Tesla hasn't figured out how to not crash into a flipped over truck in the road at night. So, there's still a long way to go there before we can just start completely trusting ourselves. It's with that is what we can see and touch. It's not fair to think that just because we're talking about cybersecurity, then it's going to be perfect. And whatever comes out, we can just trust and not do it anymore ourselves. That said, it is a tremendously powerful tool for in the compliance space in particular, I think, because there's just so much correlation to be done. That is what excels, what AI excels at. And the Gen AI part is the addition of, after having done that correlation, actually putting out something that's useful. But I don't think we're there. We can just blind trust it just yet.
And that's a good point for the audience, as Matthew was saying. If your auditor, you do a Zoom with your auditor and they have 7 fingers, it might be a deep fake. So, but
I got 5 each.
I think that my own viewpoint is just such a data intensive task, not task, but whole industry that compliance comprises. There are just a lot of opportunities, and AI is going to be very transformational. But it's that sort of time frame challenge that it's really hard. Everybody that's a really good entrepreneur, they can predict the future, but they don't really know when it's going to happen. And I think that's sort of where I'm at. But I do, to sort of the next question, I do think one area that AI is probably going to have a really big impact here, and again, exactly when I'm not sure, is this idea of understanding, and Danielle had mentioned this as part of the compliance automation revolution, is which security controls like deliver the highest risk reduction, which are really the best, because it seems like a lot of regulations, compliance standards, things like that. Because in different cases, different controls certainly are more important, that maybe we don't like really focus on this. But I wanted to get that sort of perspective. Maybe I can stay with you, Matthew, first, if you wouldn't mind, on but this idea of, can we like get to a point where we really have a much better understanding of what types of controls within frameworks, what actions can really be the best in terms of reducing risk?
So I think absolutely there's a case for prioritization. And that's already happening, perhaps in different ways, depending on how mature an organization is. So if we start at the lower level, I would say the SANS 20 historically has been a good example of prioritizing a set of controls that uh, will give you the biggest bang for the buck, so to speak. And by implementing these 20 controls, you can reduce probably, the 80-20 curve of risk. That is quite generic, might not necessarily hit the sweet spot in every organization. And if we look on the other end of this, in much more mature organizations, even though we might be pursuing a complete implementation of NIST or ISO or whatever the standard might be, there's always going to be a risk-based prioritization inside of that. I haven't seen, and I wouldn't advise anybody to try to implement the complete NIST CSF framework just right out of the gate. That doesn't make any sense, and it's going to probably not be very effective. So there's going to be a timed rollout of that, and that should be driven by the internal enterprise risk management program. So, and then there's everywhere in between of those two extremes. But I would be hard pressed to produce a case where prioritization is not the most effective way to go. Now, which exact controls within a cloud framework are the ones to prioritize is a more technical question, and I'll leave that to our more technical colleagues, but absolutely it's the way forward.
Adam, what's your perspective on this idea of reducing controls by finding the ones that have the most ROI for risk reduction?
Yeah, I look at it. First of all, I agree with Matthew 100%. The everybody's doing risk based analysis on the control set that's in front of them for each framework and for their business, and I think most organizations, and there's not one answer to which controls, and I think this is why Matthew shied away from giving you a specific. I think every organization is different. I know when I sat in the CISO chair for an organization, the first thing we did is look, instead of looking at the framework and what controls are we going to look at, we said what is the most important data, systems, information, parts of our network, and then we narrowed it down to this is what we need to protect that, right? And so we prioritize it based on our own business needs, not based on a couple talking heads saying go, secure your network or encrypt everything, because it's different for every organization. And your business critical, your mission critical information and systems, and it changes, right? The company I was in, we said the data is number one. We got to go protect the data. So where does that data live? How do we protect that data? Other organizations, sometimes it's the infrastructure that's number one. And so it is the systems. And there's a reason why we have to ensure availability and integrity of those systems themselves, not just the data that sits in them. So I think every organization is going to have a different prioritization, but that's where it should start from, is a point of classification, identifying what's most important to your organization, and then building out from there. The unfortunate part of compliance is that all compliance regulations don't see risk-based compliance as the same, right? So they still require a base of, commonality that they expect, and a minimization, I'll say, of open action items, whether for regardless of what they call them, and they expect continuous improvement. So they want you to get to euphoria when it comes to security. Doesn't exist, but they want you to get closer and closer. And so they're looking at you having a well-rounded environment and a well-rounded program. But definitely organizations need to figure out what they need to lean into. And this is where I think compliance and security converges a little bit too, is working with your security organization, working with your business to figure out what those high priority and critical components are, and those critical controls will help organizations minimize their own risk while also meeting those compliance requirements.
Yeah, I would agree, and I think that the making this more of a data science, or having greater influence from data sciences and how we do this, is going to create more transparency, which is going to help us move into that direction of more commonality and how we take risk management and other factors into account. I think what we'll do now is we'll go ahead and let you do final thoughts here, and thinking about what we've talked about, where we want to go. And we know we're just going to have so much more technology in every organization over time. And so the things that we're thinking about, we really want them to scale into the future. But so you can give that some thought. But Daniele, maybe you want to start and just like anything you wanted to add, anything else you want to do in terms of letting people know about this initiative.
I guess I'll start from where my estimate colleagues left it, from risk, which I guess is going to be also within the context of our compliance automation revolution a key driver. In the sense that all I've heard from my colleagues, and by the way, I fundamentally agree, is that we aren't yet, it seems to me, able to measure risk and quantify risk in a proper way. So to get to the point to determine the ROI of a control. To get there, in my opinion, we need to do a much more granular work in order to understand what behind the scene. And that process goes necessarily with the implementation of automation. It goes necessarily through the communication machine to machine, uh, because that is where we are going to be able to collect that rich pool of data that are going to let us describe the context, which, as we have heard during this conversation, it's fundamental, because when we talk about risk is context specific, it's not context agnostic. So it's going to give us the possibility to better describe the context in which our organization lives and the context in which the various requirements, being the legal, regulatory, internal policy, are going to be applied and can be measured. So all of it is part of this process of making sure that we are making compliance more efficient and more effective via automations, via the necessary tooling that we are going to need, and we are going to leverage that information that is going to be the result of that collection of evidence and data that is part of the process. That is where I guess we should be accelerating, because clearly we want to get at the end of this journey in a situation where we are going to be able to really measure and quantify the risk we are exposing our organization, our data, and from then on, all the rest of the discussion, in my opinion, are going to be much easier.
Right. Thanks, Daniele. Matthew, having heard that and thought about this panel, what are your final thoughts?
I would like to place a point of emphasis on what Daniele said. I like the reference earlier. We know what the future looks like. We just don't know when we'll get there. So what he's talking about is inevitable. And the reason I say it's inevitable is not a technology driven argument. It's an economics driven argument. And the fact is that to remain competitive, either companies or government organizations themselves or the providers of services to those companies are going to have to automate these processes. And there's no way around that now, whether that's tomorrow or next week or next year or in 10 years. Well, 10 years is too far out, but maybe next year, whatever. This is the way forward. And if we don't follow that path, then we're going to fall behind one way or another, whatever our yardstick for measurement is. And I think it's important that we call ourselves experts. Frankly, I don't think there's an expert in cybersecurity because the field is too large. But together, we are the experts in this field. And if we don't get out in front of the argument, then it's going to be steered by somebody that maybe doesn't quite understand the implications of what they're putting out there as far as compliance requirements goes. So I fully support this initiative, as does Deloitte, and we're absolutely convinced this is the right way to go.
Thanks, Matthew. Totally agree. Adam, you get to close us out here. Your final thoughts.
Yeah, great. I think Danielle and Matthew said most of it. I would say I'll just add on my final note on automation, AI, this initiative, the regulatory harmonization, all the pillars that we've talked about today is, and it's been said, I think a couple times, if not at least once, if not a couple times, that right now companies feel like compliance is a burden. It's not something that they're looking forward to. It's not something that they do it because they're mandated. And while it's good, and I think it drives an organization forward to identify and see some maybe blind spots that they wouldn't have thought about otherwise, I think this initiative, I think automation, I think AI can help get us closer to that compliance as a business enabler, as a value add, because I think it brings us back to providing those proof points in small ways along the way as we put stuff, get them out of spreadsheets into a platform, start automating small parts of it, whether it's workflow or configuration reviews, and then using generative AI in small use cases to get a little bit more efficient so that we can accelerate our time to market, accelerate the business need for why compliance exists today and why security exists to protect the environment and reduce risk as an organization. I think finding that final step and being able to make it a business solution and not a compliance outcome or a security solution alone, I think is what this initiative helps do, as Matthew said, because we come together as a community to find the solutions to help make this a business enabler and a business driver rather than just a compliance outcome and a compliance discussion.
I love that, Adam. It's good for us to bring this back, that ultimately we are going to make businesses better. Hopefully, we're going to make the world better, and it's an exciting new era, I think, in compliance. So, for the listeners out there, if you would like to be part of the compliance automation revolution, maybe your organization would like to be a founder as we make the formal launch here shortly, you can go click the link you see here on the page here, cloudsecurityalliance.org/CAR. And we thank you very much. We hope you enjoy the rest of the summit. Thank you.